Hi, I'm Nancy Snoke, and today I'm talking about evolving your office's security culture. Quick, who am I? Better. Okay, this year I started my own business, Magic Security LLC, and we focus on finding and fixing vulnerabilities in web and mobile applications. I've worked as a pen tester and a developer before. From my educational standpoint, I have my BSc in computer engineering and physics, a minor in math. I've dropped out of my PhD program. I'm on Twitter, and you could email me, check out my company website or my personal blog. All right, so this is a story-based talk, and all the stories I'm going to be saying are true, but I changed everyone's name in them. Sorry. Oh, you meant my body. But I changed all the names here to protect the insecure people I'm talking about. So I stole my pseudonyms from the Atrocity Archives by Charles Stross. Good book. So in the first story, I'm going to be Bob or Mr. Howard. And the only other character is going to be Andy, who's a really good manager who sometimes doesn't understand theoretical stuff. So this one's a failure that should never have happened. And it starts with my first day at a job. And so my new boss comes up to me, Andy, and he's like, "Hey, Bob, we're so happy you're here. And we really want to take advantage of all your security background. So for your first assignment, could you come up with a list of proposals of how we can improve our security here?" And so I'm like, yeah, great. Because that's a good opportunity. I mean, you can actually show what you think they need to do. And so I don't ask any questions. I just sit down, start doing the task. I end up with a 50-page, probably, paper of things they need to improve, complete with citations as to why this is the best practice. And so when I'm done, I email, "Hey, Andy, here's the proposal you wanted. Thanks, Bob." And I wait, and I don't hear. And so I'm like, "Hey, Andy, did you ever read that?" And he's like, "Well, I started reading it, but, I didn't get much past the abstract." Yes, it had an abstract. But, and so nobody ever read it, and so nobody ever did any of those improvements. So they wanted to next introduce doing a postmortem when you have a failure, which I normally do by asking a couple questions. And I chose 4 of them here that I think are generally good. You can always add more. But yeah, what is the best thing? What's the worst thing? What could have been improved? And what could I have done differently? And in this case, the best thing was that I researched and figured out what happened. And the worst thing was obviously that no one read it. So what could I have done differently? I meant what could be improved. I could have probably made it shorter, clearer, and focused on 1 or 2 important changes. And as to what I could have done differently, I should have been curious and asked more questions, because they may have had 1 or 2 things that they were really interested in, and then they would have been really into doing those changes. As well as I should have known who I was talking to, and they weren't a security person, and thus I should have kept it short and clear and focused on the business, because that's what they wanted. So this is the story that sort of got me interested in security culture. And so from here, I'm going to do a brief segue into what theoretical information there is on security culture and changing it, just for a few minutes. So to start with, what is culture? And if you go to Google and type it in, this is what you get. The behaviors, beliefs, values, and ideas are symbols of a group that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. And if you do the same thing for security, you get the state of being free from danger or threat. So we can quickly derive security culture is the behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols of a group that help you be free from danger. And there's one important word here, and that's group. Yes, it works on this. So you can't have any culture without a group of people or a group of something. So we could quickly analyze the culture of DerbyCon, which would be subtly different from the culture of the random people in Louisville. Besides the demographics, which are obviously different, we probably have other more obscure traits that are different. I bet we would have better passwords than the random people on the street, for example. And another important thing to note is that you have the culture of DerbyCon as a whole, but there are also different subgroups here. And some of those subgroups are the sponsors, the organizers, the staff, speakers, and attendees. And each of these groups will have a different subculture. So when you're trying to change culture, if you have a strong subculture and a weak main culture, it's very hard to change because the subcultures fight back of the smaller groups. All right, so next, so there's a group hierarchy, and I made this up. I have no clue how DerbyCon's actually is. I was just making it up. But in the group hierarchy, depending on where you are, you get to do different actions. So, and they actually have a nice way of identifying their hierarchy here to some extent. I noticed all the color-coded shirts. So the people in the purple shirts are the ones who are supposed to be messing with the cameras. And if I came over there and started doing it, somebody would probably stop me because that's outside of my role in the hierarchy as a speaker. I'm not supposed to come over and mess with the cameras. So you just need to stay within your hierarchy or else something bad happens. And so I just made this up, as I said, the organizers telling the staff what to do, and the staff tell both the sponsors, where to set up, and the speakers where to speak, and tell the attendees how to line up in lines to go to talks. And the sponsors I show having some influence to attendees because they can incentivize you to change your behavior, a cool drawing. And the speakers can change your behavior possibly by influencing you by something they say, although that's probably not as often as the incentivizing of the sponsors. All right, so what do you actually do to change culture? You can change one of three things: the people, the technology, or the policies. And by changing the people, I mean literally changing the people in the group. So taking away people, adding more people, etc. So a good example here, let's say you have a group who plays Axis and Allies every Saturday. And you add 2 new people to the group. And the 2 new people like Axis and Allies, but they may also like the game Betrayal at the House on the Hill. So all of a sudden you become the group who plays Axis and Allies or Betrayal at the House on the Hill instead of just the group who plays Axis and Allies. Now if you change the technology, in my example, the technology they were using was a board game. You could change it to, all of a sudden, if they want to play an online game or LAN games or a gaming system, you change the technology. And that does change the culture. Now, policies can be written or unwritten. And my example gaming group obviously doesn't have written rules. But they might have an unwritten rule about, say, bringing beer to someone's house every time you go over there. So in that case, it might change if, say, somebody goes on a diet and say, hey, I need light beer. So instead of bringing regular beer, you start bringing light beer. That's the new policy. And now a brief note on policy enforcement. Quick story. This is at the same job as my first story. I had a job assignment to write some policies for PCI compliance and secure coding. And I was really excited about it because there was all sorts of problems in the code. I was like, this is going to really change everything. So I didn't fall in the same fault as the first one. I got it down to 5 sentences, which if you followed them, you might have to read the more detailed descriptions of those sentences if you didn't know what I meant. But if you followed them, you'd be secure. And I was so excited, and everyone signed off, said they'd read them, but then the code didn't change. Nobody did it. And why? Because there was no enforcement. Nothing positive or negative happened, one way or the other. So If you don't have enforcement, then people will just ignore the policies. And as a general rule, negative enforcement can be really bad in security because it will make people scared to tell you about a security incident if they think they'll be fired or something. So then they start covering things up. So you may want to make sure that people aren't going to be too scared if you're using negative reinforcement to actually report things. All right, so I stole this chart, which is crooked, from Josh Moore's book on job reconnaissance. And I just wanted to make a note that there is a correlation between the organizational maturity and how you can change culture. So when companies first start, they're really small and they have cowboy-style management. And that means the people who own it probably make all the decisions. And there, if you want to change the culture, you need to change the owner's opinion. They're the only one who's setting it. Then they grow, they get this trust-based management, which is where they delegate to everyone, okay? So everyone is a trusted employee who's delegated to. And in that case, you have to get a consensus of everyone to change the culture. But then because you can't trust everyone when you keep growing, you end up with lightly structured management where you have to put some rules in place to keep some people from doing stupid things. And in that case, it starts getting harder to change the culture if you're not in the right position. And the right position is generally that of the security officer or something like that. But you can still do it there, it just takes a little more work. But if you get up to the highly structured companies like the 60,000 employee things with lots of locations, you cannot change the whole culture of the company. You need to focus on your subgroup and hope that people will recognize that your subgroup had made some great changes and want to bring it into the rest of the company. But pretty much there's no way to change a heavily structured company without going outside your group hierarchy and possibly getting yourself into trouble, unless you're in that good position. All right, so now I'm going on to my second story. And there are a lot of characters in this, but I'm speeding this one up, so we don't actually need them all. There's me, Bob, and Mr. Howard, Harriet, who's a bad manager, and then we have some other people who are briefly mentioned, Pinky and the Brain, some really clever coworkers, the interim security head, Harry, Fred from accounting, who will kill himself, probably because he has no clue what he's doing, the auditors, Angleton, who's a smart higher up, and Andy again. So this one's called Persistence in the Wake of Oblivion. And this story starts with me going to a year-end review, and with Harriet, who was no longer my manager, so it was more of a formality. So we were just trying to be nice to each other, and she's like, so Bob, tell me what you're doing now. And so I talked for a minute. I was like, so Harriet, what are you doing? And she's like, well, there's this one cool project we're working on. It's really great. Fred from accounting came up with it. Oh, what's that? Well, we found out a great way to get rid of all those pesky problems we get with the customers calling for password resets. How are you going to get rid of that? We're going to get rid of the passwords. Oh, really? What are you going to do? Oh, we're just going to get rid of them altogether. We're going to have them log in with their first name, last name, birth date, and zip code. Did you think about we might have two customers with the same name, zip code, birth date? Oh, we looked it up. We don't. Well, you know, there could be a security risk. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. Now, as I said, Harriet was a bad manager. So not the type of person you can argue with. And as this wasn't my project, it was a good idea to not push the point there. But if she was a good manager or the type of person who's reasonable, you would push here with. But instead, I just got some information and asked her who was working on it, found out it was Pinky, and decided that I needed to do something else. Now, in a difficult situation, I use a pre-mortem, which is just to help me focus on the best steps and what to do. And the questions I ask here are, what's the best case scenario? What's the worst case? What am I feeling? And what steps should I take? And I ask, what am I feeling? Because if I'm really upset or annoyed, I might do something really stupid that could get me into some serious trouble. obviously. So in this case, the best case is that the business pulls the idea. And the worst case is that they don't pull it. And I'm feeling annoyed. And I decide to try to talk to Pinky, the person who's actually on the project, and see if he can take care of it. Now, I have to speed up this story a lot, so we're going to skip over the gigantic rigmarole. But I talk to Pinky, and then I end up having to talk to the interim security person. And then we go back to Pinky again, and we get no response from internal audit because they're slow, and we eventually elevate it up to a manager. And then business finds out that we're telling them they shouldn't do this, and they get really upset. And so we end up making some more decisions, and we decide to elevate all the way up to Angleton.
That's right. When this business is upset with them or you?
With us for trying to pull their awesome idea.
Okay.
So we elevate up to Angleton, who from my pseudonyms at the beginning was like a really powerful higher up at the company, and probably the highest up person I felt comfortable talking to. And he took care of it. He saw our problem, and we had to wait patiently a little bit, but they got rid of it. So it was about elevating carefully through the hierarchy of the people. And as I said, again, you don't want to do this if you're actually dealing with a reasonable person. The Harriet from the original story was totally non-reasonable. So a quick post-mortem. The best thing was that we got rid of the passwordless requirement. And the worst thing was the length of time. So what we needed to improve was better communication in this case. And we could have possibly kept the business from being upset and also sped up the response time. And as far as what I could have done differently, the auditor who we needed to get on our side was well known for hating long emails, so we should never have sent her one. So we needed to keep it short and snappy and pick up the phone, call and just tell them that we wanted to discuss something. Would have probably helped. So now story 3 is raising security awareness in developers. And on this one, we had a need for training that I found out. I was looking at StoneRCube doing some static analysis, and I just saw this comment going through some stuff. Attempt to load their username and password from cookies. The values are decrypted using strong cryptography for enhanced security. Sounds good. And whatever's going on in the code is hidden because it goes down into another class. So you can't see what they're actually doing here. So I dig down to the class, and I see this one. This class uses strong cryptography for enhanced security. Anyone want to guess what algorithm they were actually using? Who said, over here, somebody said something, what?
I said
No.
base 64.
No, it wasn't quite base 64, but they were actually using single des. Yes, the stuff that was broken in 1998, I believe. This, besides reporting this as a bug that we needed to fix immediately, not be using single des, I also was like, okay, we have some people really confused on what security means here. We need to put in some training into place. And they said no. They didn't think we had the time or the money to spend on training. So I did another little pre-mortem here. And the best case scenario was to get them to train their developers. And the worst case was somebody was still going to think des was strong cryptography. And what was I feeling? I was actually very ready for action here. And so I actually created some training on my own at home. And I got a group of people to do it at lunch. And then I also got metrics to show the efficacy of the training. So a note on metrics. You have 2 types, learning and results metrics. Learning metrics are what you get like when you're actually doing the learning activities, and you can do like a survey before and a survey after and measure the change in behavior, or do a knowledge test to show that they learned something. Whereas the results-based metrics need a baseline. So in this case, a good baseline, as I said, we were looking at SonarCube for static analysis, was to use like the SonarCube, the errors that it picked up in the code on security as a baseline. Or if you're doing something else, it might be how many people clicked a phishing email. But then you didn't keep measuring those metrics over time and see how they change. So I did my secure code lunching learns. I developed my damn vulnerable, overpoweringly cute cat app. And I gave them secure code surveys that looked about like this for before and after. And I used this specific example because of the comment on the second question, that to your knowledge, have you ever coded anything insecure? If I did, I wasn't aware. Which was sort of, they didn't quite grasp the point of the question, but. So my secure code lunch and learns, there were not as much change as you would think, but on the scale of 1 to 5, how knowledgeable are you? Went from 2.25 to 2.7 average. To your knowledge, have you ever coded something insecure? Went from 50% to 80%. On 1 to 5, how important is it to consider security? We had 4.25 and 4.4 after. And I consider security when coding about what percent of the time? 60 to 66%. And the 2 questions I only asked on the last one were, will I be able to use the information in the class? I got 100% true. And I've already used the information, 20% true. So this was a small group. We had only like 7 to 4 people, depending on what day. It was done over 7 lunches. So, and then I took these results and I tried to get them to do a real training for all the developers. And they again said no. But it didn't end here, because enter the PCI auditors, who I volunteered to deal with. And I actually got them to suggest that I teach a secure coding to the developers. And then we did it, and that I did using another great app I made, using Spring MVC and Java, the Damn Vulnerable Zoo Baby app, which is also on my GitHub, if anyone wants to look at it. It's sort of cute. But it's very easy, so probably not a challenge, because it's really just to show vulnerabilities for people who weren't familiar to them. But yeah, so and actually after going through all this with the PCI auditors, I even got the security officer to want me to help with corporate phishing programs and other security awareness campaigns. So some conclusions here. That you should always consider the company management style and size before trying to change things, and try to stay within where you are in the group hierarchy to not get yourself in trouble. But do elevate if you need to. I strongly suggest using postmortems to analyze what went wrong when you fail. And try using the premortems if you're confused as to what to do in the middle. And yeah, even though it didn't work exactly in my case, I still say, when you cannot get permission to run the program, try running the voluntary program in your free time. Even if you cannot get everyone to go, you might still get enough people to change their opinion. The people who will come to the voluntary program will change what they're doing, and it can influence others, even if you can't get the company as a whole on board. And yes, do use external auditors to your advantage. No one wants to deal with the auditors, I've found out. And it may be easier than you think to get into those meetings. Some resources. Build a Security Culture is a great book. Strongly recommend it. And there's the Security Culture Framework, which has some great articles online. I like Bill Gardner's and Valerie Thomas's book, Building an Information Security Awareness Program. And Chris Hadnagy and Michelle Fincher's Phishing Dark Waters has a lot of things you can extrapolate. It's all focused on corporate phishing, but you can a lot of times extrapolate that to other sorts of security programs and culture. And I just listed Josh Moore's book because I used his graph. Anyway, that's all I have. I think we might have 1 minute if there's questions.
Was your contact information in the last slide or the first one?
It was on the first.
Can you go back so the people who had come in late can snap that, and we can ask you the more questions? Then we need more than a minute.
Yes.
Awesome.
It's going to take forever to go back, isn't it?
I wasn't thinking it'd take the whole minute just doing that. Sorry.
Yes. I sorry about that. Should maybe just exited out and restarted it. That would be easier.
Okay, fine. If it's PowerPoint, when you exit, hit escape and then hit F5, it will start at the first slide.
Yes. Well, if it ever comes up, here. There's my contact information, my Twitter, my email, my company website, my personal blog, which hasn't been updated for a while, but been very busy.
Sorry. Keep going.
Does anyone have a question? I think we're now probably a minute over, so.